Hello, I'm Lacey Sheldon. I'm a librarian here at Macintosh Memorial Library. And today I'm so excited to welcome Joy Miller. She will be our presenter today. Joy Miller is from Kendall, Wisconsin, and she grows organic vegetables at Keewaydin Farms, and that's in Viola, with her husband, Rufus Hockey. Joy studied farm and food justice while earning her master's in liberal arts from Johns Hopkins University, and completed her graduate research project entitled Socially Responsible Food and Ethical Food Consumerism on Food Values right here in the Driftless. She wrote this in 2018. In February of 2021, Joy and her husband Rufus launched Driftless Curiosity, which is a land-based learning nonprofit with, get this, with a mission to deepen people's connection to the land. Joy also shares their daily farm stories in a creative media project called Deer Farm Journal, and has published a zine from a selection of her work. So welcome so much, Joy. She is going to discuss today her research project, and it's a community-based research project that examines values towards socially responsible food and practicing ethical food consumerism in the Driftless community. Through interviews, observations, surveys, and focus groups, she discovered a high level of conscientiousness in a portion of this community concerning food, as well as the gaps being between reported values and consumer behavior, which were primarily driven by a price barrier. So the social characteristics that had a positive influence on food values were the history of agricultural injustice concerning food policy and the presence of cooperatives which support farmers. So these findings agree with previous studies which found ethical food consumerism to be prompted by internal motivators, social values, and social concern. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this camera over to Joy, and we will hear more about what she has found. Go, Joy. With this, and just one moment. We're gonna get Joy's name up on here. There we go, Joy. Here's Joy, everybody.
All right, thank you so much, Lacey. And that was an awesome introduction. So before I was a farmer in the Viroqua community, I was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins University. But when I met Rufus, and I had been studying multicultural literature, cool. But when I met Rufus, I like to say I fell in love with a farmer, the farm, and farming in less than a full season. And that really turned the focus of my academic path from multicultural literature to food justice and studying food values in the Driftless. Mm-hmm. So the title of this talk is Driftless Farm and Food Equity. Mm-hmm. And equity can be kind of a loaded cultural term with all kinds of context that we bring into it. But stripped down to just its dictionary definition, it's the quality of being fair or the freedom from favoritism or bias. So unfortunately, our food system is far from being fair. Mm-hmm. It's riddled with prejudice, health disparities, food insecurities, and a long history of violence and discrimination that go back to stealing land from the indigenous peoples, enslaving Africans, and exploiting immigrants and migrant workers. However, that history is far too long and complex for me to cover here today. What I have is a small research project that maybe will give us a sliver of insight about the food values that we have here in our community.
Great.
So I'll present my research and you can decide where the quality of being fair comes in or doesn't come in.
Yeah.
So when I moved into the Viroqua area, I saw a different set of food values. I saw people supporting farmers. I saw people buying organic. I saw cooperatives, and it was different than any other community I'd ever lived in. And I wanted to find out why these values were here. So I started formulating my research project, Socially Responsible Food and Ethical Food Consumerism. So I examined levels of concern and consumer patterns concerning socially responsible food. Specifically, I looked at organics, non-GMOs, antibiotic and hormone-free, fair trade, or other foods that intentionally prioritize the well-being of farmers and food workers, local food, humanely raised, environmentally conscious, and low carbon impact foods.
Wow.
So on my survey, I asked people what their levels of concern were on these issues, and then followed up with that. Well, how often do you buy organic, non-GMO?
And you sent out the survey here, right in the area?
Yep, I sat at different food locations. So I sat at the Rural Food Co-op, a couple other grocery stores. I went to farms. I had a focus group at the Rooted Spoon.
Wow.
And I just started having conversations and surveying people both in person and online.
Okay.
And so what I found was, as I hypothesized, was a high level of conscientiousness in our community. But I also found that there were gaps between reported values and consumer behavior. And that's what's called a value action gap. That's when you hold a certain value, but you don't go through with that action.
Right.
So for example, the main one here I found was people were concerned about pesticides. They want to buy organic, but they don't.
I see.
And the reason is that price barrier. So the this phenomenon of the price barrier poses another problem or quality of fairness to consider. And that's that most people can't afford to buy these higher quality, higher priced foods. And so therefore they must purchase and consume the chemically grown, genetically modified, inhumanely raised, environmentally damaging, carbon careless foods that exploit everything from the microorganisms in the soil all the way to the human hands, many humans' hands that it passes through before they eat it.
And that's so real. That's so real deal. That's so, I think, very much here and present. And how hard is that too, where you have like your moral belief and like, you don't necessarily want to do that, but that's the option that you have.
Right.
Because that's it. That's what you can do. So.
And it's a cyclical problem then. So it's perpetuating, personal, social, economic, and environmental sickness. And what effect does that have on people?
Right.
And so the price of food became a significant factor for me to look at in my research. And since capitalist economics are at the center of our food system, I looked at this model of commerce as something that should be evaluated when we're looking at considering the food system failures. So I started out my thesis with looking at the current food system failures that we're dealing with, and globally, and some of the things that aren't fair. So I looked at failing personal health, failing economics, and failing environment. So starting with failing personal health, the health crisis related to our globalized diet is far-reaching and diverse. So on one end of the spectrum, you have people who are suffering from starvation, malnutrition, and food insecurity. Over a third of humanity suffers from hunger and malnutrition. But what I've found is that the problem of hunger and malnutrition doesn't have to do with a lack of food. So in Eric Holt Jimenez's book, The Foodie's Guide to Capitalism, How Understanding the Political Economy of What We Eat, he writes, quote, "We produce 1.5 times more than enough food for everyone on the planet, already enough to feed 10 billion people." End quote. So the problem is that people in poverty, low income people, and increasingly middle class people can't afford to purchase this food. Therefore, we're not dealing with a problem of resources. We're dealing with a problem of social values that causes unequal distribution in food economies. So what I saw is that a profit-driven and wasteful food system produces an abundance of food while simultaneously keeping billions of people hungry and malnourished.
Wow. Yeah.
And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, we are producing an overabundance of cheap, convenient commodity foods. And they are high in calories, processed ingredients, sugar, fats, and food additives. And these are becoming more prevalent in the globalized diet. And these poor foods are manifesting as an epidemic of diet-related diseases, and they don't provide the nutrition that our bodies need. So we're seeing diabetes, heart-related diseases, cancer, all on the rise. This manifests as high healthcare costs and lower quality of life. So instead of valuing food as a profit-winning commodity, I see that we need nothing short of a paradigm shift to start seeing food as a social necessity. And focus on making nutritional, fresh food available and affordable and accessible for all people.
Right.
And that brings me to the failing economics. So the social and economic inequality adds another dilemma, dimension of the dilemma of the industrialized food system, which is, and these problems are built into the framework of capitalist economics. One food first advocate I wrote, quote, "Many people say the food system is broken, but it's not. It's working exactly as an unregulated capitalist food system is supposed to work. It overproduces food by overusing resources and exploiting people. It consolidates wealth and power and passes off the costs to the rest of society in the form of poverty, hunger, disease, and environmental externalities." End quote. So it uses farmers and rural communities as a means to a corporate end, making money. Only 10 companies control every large food brand in the world.
10? Did you say 10?
Yeah.
Wow.
And when food is valued as a profit-making commodity, the motivations of corporations, the lobbyists that work for them, and the policymakers who they influence are not to feed the world, not to produce healthy food, not to protect the environment, not to provide well-paying jobs. The value that's taken precedence over all others is the profit winning, the increase of every fiscal quarter. They want to make more money, and that's just the structure of capitalism.
Right.
And so the values of capitalism and consumerism are deeply embedded in our culture, and we can see them evident in much of the food system structure, including the priorities of food policy, including the Farm Bill, the disappearance of small family farms, government subsidizing of conventional non-organic commodity crops, unjust trade agreements, the rise of CAFOs, the use of monocropping, glyphosate, GMOs, growth hormones, antibiotics, and underpaid and exploited farmers and food workers. All of these are ways to increase investor profit, and it goes relatively unchecked in spite of all of the harmful consequences that are becoming more and more well documented. So these trends obstruct economic democracy, and they're damaging to rural communities like ours. But we've seen that Viroqua has been able to kind of be on the rise as a community, where other small agricultural communities have just turned into ghost towns. All the children leave, all the businesses, the schools close. And so you have this domino effect of social hardship, people losing their land, their schools, their grocery stores, their libraries, their services. And they struggle with isolation, increasing farm debt, the need to travel far distances for employment or services, and then also the presence of unpleasant large farm operations like CAFOs, and then you have the consequences of that, like water contamination.
Yeah. Air
Um,
pollution.
and a lot of people in this area are seeing more and more water contamination, high nitrates. Like we have a reverse osmosis system in our house because even though we farm organically, we share a watershed with people who don't.
Right.
So you're dealing with a lot of these externalities coming on the agricultural communities, and the capital investors just reaping all the profits.
Right.
So instead of the cheap food system that capitalism has created, we need a transformation of values that empowers small farmers and people from all backgrounds to make a dignified living while also preserving the land. And I see that this will require a huge shift in social and economic values. And that brings me to the failing environment. Without the environment, the land and the water, we can't produce food at all. So the rapid environmental degradation we're seeing is also related to the unhinged, or it's hinged to the unregulated, unlimited capitalist practices. But Earth's systems and resources are finite. You can't just keep using and using more and more and more, and you know, they're finite. The food sector is responsible for 30% of global emissions. And that's becoming an increasing threat to life on Earth, related to climate change. And not only are our agricultural practices spiking, you know, contributing to spiking global temperatures, we're also eroding fertile topsoil. We're contaminating vital water sources, and crucial pollinators are experiencing massive collapse. And it's the poor farming practices that were pushed forth for their profit-winning possibilities that are causing these environmental damages. And they fail to look at the quality of the land and the soil and the water that's necessary for food production. And we really do fail to care for our environment when we look at the narrow scope of values, which is the yield per acre, and the profit that's linked to that. So what's the significance of understanding food values? Why is this important? So in spite of all of these realities, the failing health, the failing economics, and the failing environment, consumers, corporations, and policymakers have been really slow to move towards solutions. And if we continue to limit our scope of values, and just look at these norms rooted in hyperconsumerism and capitalism, we stand to ruin quite a bit more than we already have. And I feel that studying food values is a factor that can help us to identify catalysts and ways to influence a paradigm shift and ways to think differently about food. So also my research helped me to understand that we need corporations and especially policymakers to be the ones that take that social responsibilities based on the negative consumer patterns that they produce that we talked about. Since consumers must buy food, it's an absolute necessity, and most of the food on the market is produced in a socially irresponsible way. It's up to the corporations and the policymakers to transform the market so that consumers can afford foods that are better for them, better for their local economy, and better for the environment. And an appropriate and adequate response to these food system failures will require a lot. It's a big battle to take on. It'll require collective leadership, strategies for reform, and empowering consumers that's grounded in socially responsible values. So why do we have socially responsible values here in the Driftless? What I found was that almost every category, Driftless consumers marked an extreme level of concern. Not just very concerned, extremely concerned. And a lot of them did have a price barrier, but even with that price barrier, I found that 75 to 100% of the people, or most participants, said they buy food that aligns with their values 75 to 100% of the time. which is a lot.
Yeah.
And even considering that sometimes people overestimate their consumer patterns, it's still a relatively high rate of ethical consumerism, much higher than the norm. And I should say too that there's a limitation to this study, and that's that some places didn't allow me to come in and take surveys. Like, for example, Walmart, they wouldn't allow me to come in, and I recognize that I would have gotten a lot of different answers there. And so that's a skew of the research, is that the people who were engaged, the people who were interested in being a part of a survey like this, they are already kind of thinking about food in a different way.
Sure. Yeah.
So I wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Fair.
But even given this, it's like, okay, well, there's still a lot of people here that are thinking about food in a different way, and I wanted to find out why. And it went back to the characteristics of the land, the food policy, and how people here, a specific group of people here, reacted to that food policy. So the Driftless region is known for its terrain, its steeply dissected terrain, and its extensive network of streams. This topography limits farming to ridgetop and valley farms. And it put farmers in a precarious position when food policy started to change in the 1970s. When the Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz, told people to get out, go big or get out, get big or get out. And that was one kind of his motto, as well as to plant commodity crops, fence row to fence row. So people in the Driftless couldn't do that. The land just wouldn't allow it. Right. So they had to form a third option. So instead, there was a unique group of people here that formed a third option, and that was the back-to-landers and the hippies that came to this area. So why is this social group important? Well, social circles have the ability to redefine social norms and create a counterculture. And we have a bit of a counterculture here in Iroquois. And the hippies and back-to-landers were a counterculture that had redefined norms about food. I don't have his book here, but Jonathan Kaufman's book, written in 2018, called Hippie Food, How Back-to-Landers, Long Hairs, and Revolutionaries Changed the Way We Eat, tells a story of how a set of values extended to food choices, starting in the 1970s. Right. So hippie food was a rejection of social norms concerning food, especially the use of pesticides. And they wanted to take food back to its pre-industrialized roots and approach food as activists fighting capitalism. So many hippies wanted to go back. They wanted to leave the cities. They wanted to get to the land. They wanted to, that's why they were called the back-to-landers. Right. Exactly. And they wanted to get into farming and homesteading. And a lot of them came to the Driftless region and became organic farmers. Absolutely. And they've affected food values in this area. And not only the hippies, this was the part where Rufus said, it wasn't just the hippies. There were other farmers here, specifically Norwegian and Scandinavian dairy farmers in the area, and they really formed a foundation of that different type of thinking about agriculture. They had more of a cooperative type mindset as far as farming. Great point. So this counterculture was, they refused to be industrial chemical farmers, and they bucked the system in two big ways. Anybody guess what the two big ways they bucked the system?
Well, working cooperatively.
Cooperatives,
cooperative farming, and no spray, no till,
and organic,
and
so they went organic and they went cooperative, which was totally against mainstream food production. So local farmers realized they had to cooperate to compete. So they formed the Coulee Region Organic Produce Pool, or CROP, which is known today as Organic Valley. That was formed in 1988 in LaFarge. And so
as many people know, Wisconsin is now the #2 producer of organics in the nation, and we lead the nation in organic dairy products.
Yeah.
So the presence of what's now the nation's largest organic cooperative has permeated this rural community with everything from a high level of awareness about land ethic and also the viability, economic viability of organics. And through my research, I learned that the driftless regions of Minnesota and Wisconsin are actually the heart of co-op country. There's over 15 cooperatives in Vernon County alone, and Wisconsin was one of the first states to accept cooperative legislation behind Michigan.
Okay.
So, and again, the cooperative model was really rooted in the Scandinavian and Norwegian cultures that settled this area, and again started dairy farming. So in my survey, I asked, has the presence of cooperatives like Organic Valley and their practices within the community influenced the way you think about farming and food? And 88% responded affirmatively. So
Could you say that again one more time? Sorry.
I asked, has the presence of the cooperative business model like Organic Valley and their values and practices in the community influenced the way you think about farming and food?
Okay.
And 88% said yeah.
Wow.
Which is quite a bit. And there were like 5 people that said no, and the reason, and they wrote in why they said no, is like they already valued. Already valued the cooperative model before Organic Valley.
Okay.
Became
there you have
a
it.
thing.
Yeah.
So it was that, even though 88% was really higher than that, of people that really value the cooperative model and how that influences their food values.
Yeah, for sure.
Which confirmed one of my hypotheses that the presence of cooperatives helps us think differently about food.
Right.
And these collective social values, again, they go against the mainstream capitalism and competition, and it makes this area a unique area of study.
Yeah.
And then the other social factor that I looked at that influence food values, again, goes back to policy. And this is a history of what I call the history of agricultural injustice. And the dairy crisis, as it's been called, was linked directly to the Farm Bill. And it's caused massive shifts in agriculture in Wisconsin and across the nation, actually. It escalated in the mid-'80s when the 1980 Farm Bill started to phase out milk parity. 1983, parity was totally eliminated, which had set the support price for milk. And this neglects the cost of production. So the way I simply explain parity is like the price of milk now is similar to what it was in the 70s, but the price of everything else is higher. Gas, land, all of your inputs are more expensive.
A lot of other commodities.
And milk is one thing that farmers can't sell. It's illegal for farmers to just directly sell their milk to a consumer. They have to go through these through these channels, and they don't have any control of the price. So once parity went away, farmers started to lose their land, sell their herds. Families went through divorce. Families went through suicide was a big problem, still is. And it was devastating for the community, and it was something that was kind of written on our hearts, I think, here. I had people tell me like, I rode the bus with a family and like they didn't have enough food, and they remembered that as a kid getting on the bus, like seeing other farmers struggle in the community. They saw friends of theirs have to auction off all of their belongings, all of their farm equipment. And it was really devastating. So I asked, farmers then they're at the mercy of the free market, and they absolutely can't compete. They can't sustain their operations, and they go under. So I asked in the survey, has this history impacted the way you think about farming and food? And 62% answered yes. The majority of respondents, as I said, mentioned how the crisis impacted them personally, and that motivated them to buy local, to support small farmers, and to buy from cooperatives.
Yep.
That's it. And so community appreciation, recognition, and consumer support are vital for the survival of small farms.
Yeah.
And these attitudes that we found they represent a communal value system that looks beyond the individual trying to buy the cheapest gallon of milk.
Yep.
Because they recognize and connect that cheap milk means starving farmers, or something along those lines.
Right.
And so that appreciation for farming is a crucial lack in our current food system now, and something that, you know, again, needs a transformation of values. So in conclusion, I would say if we hope to, at least at this part, if we hope to influence the food justice movement, I think we should take a closer look at the Driftless catalyst. So when seemingly faced with the duality of choices, like get big or get out, we need to creatively collaborate with people in the community and, you know, give birth to a better option. You know, we don't only have two options. You know, we could think like the Back to Lander song, like, oh no, we're not going to do that. We got to figure out a better way.
Better ways.
And then in a you know, helping farmers take food power and agency back from large corporations. And how do we do that? You know, it's a long road of work ahead of us. Again, in a society that's disconnected from farming and food, I think we need to find ways to reconnect to the roots of what feeds us all. That could mean opening up farms as social spaces where people can come and they can connect to the land, they can connect to farmers, they can realize, oh, what does it take to grow a vegetable?
Absolutely.
How, you know, and gain an appreciation for that, which then translates into their own, you know, different food values, and maybe will impact how they spend their dollars at the grocery store. And then in a culture that moving along here,
On the street.
on the street, and in a culture that often disrespects farmers and food workers, we have to find ways to honor and support that livelihood. And that could mean raising awareness for struggling farmers, helping farmers form cooperatives, and having programs that help farmers transition to organics, which some of those things are starting to happen. And in an economy that's dominated by capitalism, we have to find alternative business models that share the wealth and work together. This could mean really reevaluating food as a capitalist commodity, emphasizing the social aspects of food, and transforming from a capitalist to more of a cooperative food economy. So in essence, I see that the heart of social movements is social values, and we really need to take a look at what our social values are, and, you know, have a revitalization, a paradigm shift of what we value and what's good for our community versus, you know, buying the cheapest thing, which it again goes back to, you're in a kind of a tough situation because a lot of people can't afford those foods.
Right.
So that goes back to how do you shift the whole economy? But again, just raising awareness and talking about it, and having conversations like this of, you know, how do we even move that needle just a little bit? How do we?
Yep, a little bit. And what does it take for, like, one step at a time sort of way of eating the elephant is one bite at a time sort of idea.
Yeah. So when I came out of when I finished my project, and I'll have to say too, like, I had a lot of, I struggled when I was in graduate school because I was constantly reading all of these social ills, and I was looking at ethical leadership and economics, and I just saw, you know, I took a deep dive into some of the, you know, the dark side of capital and capitalism, kind of kept circling back to that economic model and the problems that are built into it, right? So I decided that my role as an advocate was to be a person that helps connect people to their food.
There you go.
And to the land, and that's sort of what I've been doing since graduation. I've been writing a daily journal called Deer Farm Journal, and I write a narrative and provide photos and videos about what's going on at Keewaydin every single day. So it's something that provides transparency in agriculture, which is not something that happens a lot. And it allows people to see like, oh, this is the work that goes in. These are the struggles that, being honest about, emotional struggles or financial hardships, and just letting people see that lifestyle, because it's both a laborious lifestyle, but it's also very joyful.
Absolutely.
And there's a freedom in farming. And you get to connect with people one-on-one. So we do a CSA, which is community supported agriculture, and that's when people are in a direct relationship with their farmer. So we pack boxes every week of about 10 to 12 items, and they go out to families like in the Viroqua area and also in the Madison area. That's it. So having that direct relationship, I think, is important, getting to know a farmer. And then also we, as you mentioned in the intro, we started a nonprofit. It's a land-based learning nonprofit called Driftless Curiosity earlier this year. And our mission is to deepen people's connection to the land through curiosity, experiential education, farming, social justice, and the arts. So we host a diverse range of workshops on the farm. This year we started out just one per month. And we did everything from being out in the sugar bush and the maple trees and tapping trees and making maple syrup. We did foraging in the spring. We talked about permaculture and the benefits of those practices. We did a nature journaling workshop. We did a stream study and fly fishing workshop, talking about the health of our water and how agricultural practices are linked to the health of our streams here. And
preservation or preserving food upcoming.
Oh yeah, food preservation is coming up. How to do things like all of our grandparents knew how to do, can and dehydrate and
back
freeze
to the canning.
Back to canning. Make your grandma proud.
There you go.
Learn how to can.
That's it.
And and in that food preservation, there's also an idea of sustainability and not having to rely so much on the market, but providing our own food and having a a self-sustainable element to our existence. More people than ever, I think, started growing gardens last year during COVID and growing their own food. And then they were like, oh, you can only give away so many zucchinis. So you got to learn how to preserve that. That's it. So there's these like homesteading skills that I think have been lost in a lot of families, like passing down traditions. And so it's fun to put that out there.
We also have a lot of books on canning and preserving here at McIntosh Memorial Library. Shameless library.
Do it. So that's kind of what I've been up to, and I guess if anybody has any questions or comments.
Definitely. Let's we're going to switch gears here a little bit. I'm even going to move the screen because my laptop's in the sun and getting warm. And then we'll check in with all the friends who are watching us through Facebook Live and Zoom, and also in the in-person audience today for questions. So brief pause for movement. There we go. Got a nice scrolling of the books as well.
Oh, there you go.
We have it. All right. Wow, Joy, what you have brought today has been just incredible. So thank you for that.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. Is there anyone in the Zoom audience or in-person audience or on Facebook that would like to comment or ask a question of Joy? This has been really so informative. Let's give it a moment here. Let people kind of digest what they've been able to hear.
It's a lot to digest.
It's incredible.
it was definitely very interesting to hear about, the collective and the co-op and even about Organic Valley, because I don't know about farming as much. I know I've had some distant relatives who are in that, but I have never grown up on a farm or that whole piece. So there's a lot of that you're right, there's that separation, and we need to get back in to kind of knowing that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated hearing about that.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like I think about this all the time. Like my parents, or especially my grandparents, if you talk to people in that generation, almost everybody knew a farmer, or they had somebody in their family that was a farmer, and they would, if they didn't farm themselves, they had somebody in the family that's like, oh, we would go to the farm to visit for the summer. They had that connection, where now there's fewer and fewer and fewer farmers, and so there's fewer people that have that connection. Another interesting point is we're steadily losing farmers in Wisconsin. The number of farms just keeps decreasing, but the number of cows is not necessarily decreasing, which means they're being compacted into these CAFOs, and which is a confined area feeding operation, and has a lot of negative environmental consequences, as well as the consequences of consuming products that come from animals that are mistreated and not raised in a humane way. So that's something to consider too. It's like, oh, we're losing a lot of farmers, but we're still all the cows are still here.
There was another point, not necessarily expanding on what that conversation was just now, but I did appreciate how you mentioned the heritage of the land before the 1970s, and acknowledging the small dairy farmers that were here. And to mention as well that Westby Cooperative Creamery is celebrating, they're into their 100th year of being a cooperative, and I think that is so strong. That's just like right there. And then thinking of what was happening here at the land even before that, when it was the Ho-Chunk Nation, and the cooperativeness of the Indigenous Americans that were here. And I don't want to speak, I'll stay brief about that because my knowledge base is not all there. So, but just thinking of like even before that. So moving from, Indigenous American, white ethnic settlers back to the landers, it seems like this space, I'm speaking very generally, has hosted a cooperativeness element in it before. And I appreciate that about living here.
This is a beautiful area, and it's been producing food for a long time, and I hope that we can continue to be food producers. And I know a lot of people are moving into the Viroqua area, and a lot of the reason is because we have a thriving kind of a micro local food community, and they look at that food access as being a big advantage in the community. And we're very fortunate to have that access here.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of moving the needle just a little bit, the library this year established a garden across the street here from the library, and the purpose of that garden is to be an educational and an equitable donation garden. The name of the garden is Viroqua's Growing Forward Together Garden. So we host educational events there, and then most of the produce is harvested and donated to low-income housing. And that's that equitable donation aspect of that. And there's a local organization, Community Hunger Solutions, that is a huge part of the harvesting and transporting of the produce to people who are more at risk for experiencing food insecurity, especially fresh food insecurity. And Jeanette is the director of Community Hunger Solutions, and she will be presenting next Friday at 10:30 as well. So telling us a little bit more about that and what she's been doing. And of course, we have here in Vernon County quite a few different food banks, and also I've heard of other community gardens as well. And I think that there is a drive towards that, as you mentioned, Joy. Like you have this thought that there were a lot of gardens put in this year because, around going through the pandemic, there was just that uncertainty, right? Of, am I going to be able to find fresh food on the shelves? What do I have in my storage right now or in my pantry? I can't leave the house right now. Like, I think in some of that, at least for me, I noticed that the way I value food I was being asked to look at that a lot more.
Right.
What does that mean? And how is everybody else out there doing at the same time? I had a deep concern of how are people in this community faring through all of this? And that's when the motivation to start with the library garden came in too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we noticed just a huge number of calls and messages and emails and stuff that came in during especially the early months of the pandemic. And it was CSA members, family, friends, strangers wanting to come to the farm.
Wow.
And it was, people were, they were afraid of what was going to happen. They were afraid of not having access to food. And then as things went on, they were more dealing with isolation and not having space where they could feel safe.
Right. Yeah.
So we had to navigate that of like, okay, how do we safely bring visitors onto the farm? How do we open up our farm as a space people can safely come and seek personal health, mental health, emotional health. And we did that, and it became very apparent that was a road that I wanted to go down. And influenced the launching of the nonprofit. Specifically, we had a couple of interns from the Chicago area, 19-year-old young women that they were best friends, and they like came up with this internship idea on their own. It wasn't through any school program, and we Zoomed with them a couple times, and they were just like, I'm going crazy. I got to get out of here. I just want to be on a farm. And so we're like, all right, come out. And they stayed in our cabin, primitive, off the grid.
Back
cabin.
to the land.
Yeah.
Back to the land
And
cabin.
they worked with us for a month, and I just observed how they changed and the things they learned. And it was a very inspiring thing. And I saw very deeply that people need these opportunities to be on farms. They need to be able to have wild spaces. They need to see how food is grown and be able to make those connections for themselves. And when they left, they wrote me really super sweet letters that I keep hung up on my office wall. And one of the things that touched me the most, and I keep in the back of my mind on hard days, is she wrote, "I left here a happier person."
Yeah.
You contributed to my development as a young woman, and I left here a happier person.
Yeah.
And that was just like, wow, like
That's big.
that's huge.
It's
And
big.
even if it's just one person, she's going to take that experience and carry it with her, for the rest of her life, and tell other people about it.
That's it. That land connection is really, really powerful.
And she may be willing to teach her kids how we eat.
Yes.
Because I feel like we've lost that a little bit. It's like the breastfeeding. We're not, these young people today are not seeing their mothers breastfeed. There's a fact. I come from a clinical point of view, but I feel like what you're saying is very personal. That's what we need to do for people. These are generations of kids that are and have grown up highly processed nutrition. As a species, we are habitual eaters. We see what our parents eat and eat very similar. So you're breaking that chain, hopefully educating and trying to stop that cycle on a personal level, which is really what it's got to be at this point.
Yeah, and that's an awesome point, which reminds me, and I failed to say this, was another thing I found through reviewing other literature, which is part of the research, is you have to look at, okay, what have other people already found?
Yeah.
And one thing that I found is that it's generally a subjective, personal, emotionally charged experience that changes people's what's called internal motivators, which are the things that help us to make decisions and prioritize things. It's not advertising, it's not extra knowledge, it's not a suggestion from somebody else about how you eat. It's, you know, people aren't interested really in changing the way they eat based on someone's suggestion. It's something like, oh, I went to a farm and I milked a goat for the first time and like a light bulb went on. Or they went to the Viroqua farmers market and they chatted with a lady farmer and they made this emotional connection and their curiosity was engaged.
Right.
And when you engage someone's curiosity, and often people are curious about what's going on at farms because they don't know. It's like, I don't know, they go to the grocery store.
Right.
And so you engage that curiosity, your emotions then are involved, and you create this internal motivator. You remember that experience. You remember, you know, what it was like to harvest all of your own dinner and cook it up.
Exactly.
Those things are more important than advertising or saying you should eat this and not this. People don't really care about that.
I find
Connection.
sometimes
Connection.
defiance of that. It's like, oh, you're gonna tell me what to do. Right? Who are you to say this?
But
Yeah.
it was incredibly personal.
Yeah.
Incredibly personal.
Yeah.
And
The
emotional.
comment was food is incredibly personal. That was the comment in the audience. Yeah. Amazing. It's so true. I would like to remind everyone that we are talking with Joy Miller. Joy Miller is a co-owner with her husband Rufus Hockey of Keewaydin Farms based out of Viola. They have CSA shares available to the Driftless region, and Joy is also an author, and so I'm curious about your book. She mentioned during her presentation that she has been writing blog, Dear Farm Journal, for years, and I have been following Dear Farm Journal for years as well. Joy's writing is really creative and honest. She's really showing through her writing her connection to her farm and the experiences that she has as a farmer. Joy, do you want to talk a little bit about Joy on the Farm and show us the book?
It's Joy on the Farm. It is a zine. So if you're unfamiliar with the zine publications, they're generally a small publication. They're often illustrated, and they're a short run, like only 100 or 200 are usually published. And zines came out of, they're sort of a revolutionary type writing as well. They started kind of in the early 90s when it was hard to break into the publishing scene. It was alternative ideas were often not accepted into the mainstream publishing. So people that wanted to publish alternative ideas or revolutionary type ideas would basically self-publish or do these DIY publications, and that's where it came from. Is they're kind of these underground revolutionary type publications, and then when the internet happened, they sort of went away because then everybody could kind of publish their ideas out on the internet.
Right.
But now they're starting to make a comeback. Because people are starting to value having that actual physical thing to look at, and they're a look at you know, cultural.
And you have illustrations in the book
Yeah,
too?
so it's illustrated by Pete Hodap, another local artist.
Yeah.
So like here's one illustration that I like is people all like looking at their phone.
Yeah.
This is an experience of going to Madison and doing deliveries,
Right.
and see how people are really not.
Yeah.
They're just all on their phone.
Right.
Cool chickens in here.
Yeah, nice.
So
this specific Joy on the Farm is the beginning of my experience on the farm. So it's a lot of kind of funny, odd things that happen when you go from being a city dweller to like raising
When your
chickens.
eyes
and
open.
realizing, oh, I'm broke and I'm working really hard, and how do you deal with that? And yeah, so it's a presentation of local art, local writing, local illustrations, and I'm hoping to do a series.
Great.
Working with Oak Publishing in La Crosse, and they're a
Okay.
women-owned publishing company,
Mhm.
new to the publishing scene, and yeah, that's the idea, is to kind of they for this one they curated
Mhm.
entries that they thought would go together
Oh,
to
great.
make the story. So
That's great. That's so great.
yeah.
And Joy, you write for also a few other publications. Do you want to mention that so
Yeah,
people could read more?
So starting this winter, I started working with Driftless Area Magazine.
Mhm.
So I write about local driftless businesses. So I'll go to farms and restaurants and other businesses and highlight their business and talk about their practices and,
Mhm.
and the people that they serve. And I also write for their column called Agricultural Roots.
Okay.
And I address agricultural issues in our area.
Great.
I've talked about my research in there, and just looking at current issues in agriculture and how they're affecting our community. Yeah.
So great. And friends, be sure to learn more about Driftless Curiosity, which is Joy and her husband's nonprofit organization that they operate off of their farmland. Again, that's Driftless Curiosity. And Joy, where can people go to find out more about that?
So we have a Facebook page. If you search Driftless Curiosity, you would find it there. And then we also have a website, which my good friend Gabby Marvan helped to design. She did an absolutely incredible job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's www.driftlesscuriosity.org.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can see what programs we've run so far this year, as well as what we're offering this summer and fall.
Yeah. And this fall, the library is joining Driftless Curiosity and the Folk Art Collective to collaboratively host a Day of the Dead celebration at Keewaydin Farms. And so we're very much looking forward to that. That date of that is Saturday, October 16th. That is going to be incredible. Stay tuned for more information. That is an event happening at no cost, open to the public, and you can spend some time on Keewaydin Farm and also learning from the Folk Art Collective about the Day of the Dead. So more on that soon. Any final remarks from the audience? Any final remarks from yourself, Joy?
I don't think so. Oh, I was going to say, if people are interested and wanted to read the full research paper,
yes.
You have that, and if they request it,
Absolutely.
they could receive a copy.
Yeah, great point. I do have a copy of Joy's paper available. Please email me at l.sheldon@wrlsweb.org for that or any more connection with Joy. Thank you everyone for attending today. We wish you all the best and
Thank you.
support your local farms.